morning, everyone. My name is Caitlin for Foundations of Intelligence, and today I'm going to be talking about the Intel cycle and how it relates to the Istanbul airport attack in 2016. So a little brief history on the attack. It happened on June 28, 2016 in the month of Ramadan. Several attackers used automatic weapons and suicide belts to target the Istanbul airport, resulting in the death of 45 people and injuring over 200. The interesting part about this attack is a lot of the attackers didn't make it through security. They targeted the physical checkpoints themselves, as well as large groups of people in the airport. The Prime Minister of Turkey quickly blamed ISIS. However, that organization has not claimed responsibility for this attack. So the Intel cycle has 5 steps. And it kind of ensures that the Intel community has checks and balances to ensure that they're doing their job correctly. So the 5 steps of the Intel cycle are planning and direction, collection, processing and exploitation, analysis and production, and then finally dissemination and integration. So starting with planning and direction, it's kind of how the Intel community does what they do and how they do it. So here you're going to make a list of the materials you need, the sources that you need, as well as identifying the questions that you want to answer, the reason why you're going through the Intel cycle. So the key customer in this instance is going to be the local law enforcement agencies, the Turkish equivalent of the FBI, as well as intel agencies that are familiar with violent extremist organizations. And here your customer is going to go beyond all of the Turkish representatives and also go to the United States and other foreign governments. There's going to be some issues here with working between agencies because different agencies use different lingo. We use different terms in one agency that a different agency uses other words for. Also, some agencies don't want to share the way that they got their information, so there might be a lack of sharing on that part. And then there's also going to be some international issues with that. There's going to be sharing concerns. The U.S. doesn't always want to give away their information or how they got their information and vice versa, as well as just the standard customs and courtesies here. The lack of language between two countries or the lack of an established relationship diplomatically, that's going to all cause issues with planning how you're going to go through the Intel cycle. Moving on to collection, the U.S. gathers information both overtly and covertly, meaning just out in the open or secretly. So for OSINT or open source intelligence goes, this includes newspapers, magazines, and social media. And then for covert sources, it would be like human intelligence, signals intelligence, using imagery or things like that. In this particular case with the Istanbul airport, open source intelligence is really going to be key here. You're going to be able to talk to the people involved in the attack, the people who are present in the airport, present on these airlines, anyone who may have been associated with these attackers. But there's also some really major concerns with open source intelligence. Basically 2 things, the validity of the information and also just the abundance of information. That's a huge concern for the Intel community because we really just don't have the manpower necessary to funnel through all of these open source reports that you get. And then also the validity of the information. So you have to consider that you may be looking at an open source report from one person, but they were only able to see one aspect of the attack. They don't know the entire operation behind it. So their view of the attack might be skewed, and you need to take that bias into consideration. Also here in open source, this is the reason why Turkey had a media blackout following the attack, is because they needed to limit the spread of incorrect information and also limit the visibility that this attack got because it could fuel other attacks in other parts of the world or other parts of Turkey because this attack was publicized. Moving on to processing, this is taking your collected information and publishing it into serialized reporting. So this would be like your imagery analyst telling you how many planes were at the Istanbul airport, or your human sources that you would publish the information that your sources told you, or your OSINT analyst would give you a roll-up of all the trends that they're noticing in open source. Here, in this case study, human and OSINT are going to be the most critical. And time of the essence is going to be here because there's a possibility for follow-on attacks at other airports. And also, you really just need to get the schedule back on track for Istanbul and the airport. You need to get people back to their homes. People need to be able to transport between two locations, and you can't keep that area shut down forever. Moving on to analysis and production. This is kind of where you determine all the different intels and how they relate to each other, how the puzzle pieces fit into the overall puzzle. Here's where you're going to answer your 5 W's for who conducted the attack, how they conducted the attack, why they conducted the attack. And here it's important to to understand that you don't have to know the answers to these questions. You never want to guess. So that's the whole part of assessments, is that you use words like likely or unlikely, probable. So there's a degree of uncertainty there. So your primary output is going to be warnings to other airports or different establishments, as well as military strategy on how the terror organization operated in this specific case and how we are able to study that to be able to defeat it in the future. Multiple intelligence sources here is going to give you a more well-rounded assessment and a more well-rounded product for your policymakers. Moving on to disseminations, this is when you give the information to your customer, to the policymakers, so they're able to make decisions such as upping the security at Istanbul Airport, or how the U.S. chose to stop all flights to the U.S. from Turkey for about 5 hours afterwards. So the primary customers for this particular attack is going to be the local airport security and FAA, as well as the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and other states' equivalents to that organization. The important thing here to consider is that immediately following the attack, the U.S. shut down all flights in from Turkey to the United States for about 5 hours, and that's because the intel cycle takes time. So you have to review all of your sources, you have to conduct interviews, you have to search open source information, and as you update all this information, because of the policymakers, they can come back and ask questions, which restarts your intel cycle. So the more times you go through this intel cycle over time, gives you a more well-rounded assessment. And this can result in, or this did result in the lifting of the ban on inbound flights from Turkey to the United States, because initially the United States thought that there could be a threat, but since we went through the intelligence cycle, we didn't find a credible threat. Therefore, the policymakers could update their decision. And then in summary, this intel cycle likely resulted in new laws or regulations at the airport, like increasing security at main entrances before you even get past security checkpoints in the airport, as well as possibly prohibiting large groups in the airport that were targeted during this attack. There might be new tactical initiatives because you know how ISIS acted in this attack, and knowing now that they have the capability to conduct these large-scale attacks on operations such as airports, you know they have the intent to do that, and now you know how to watch out for it, how to protect your people against it. So the long-term goal of analyzing this case study was to identify weak points in the security that could be remedied in order to make it harder next time that an ISIS member or an extremist organization wants to target somewhere similar to the Istanbul airport. An intel cycle is more successful the more time that you have, the more times you can go through the intel cycle, the more time that you can spend collecting sources and publishing those reports and whatnot. So the long-term analysis here is always going to give us a more accurate view of the event. However, it's not always possible. That's why we go through the intel cycle quickly and then continue to go through it the more questions that arise to update our assessments and give those policymakers the most up-to-date and all-inclusive assessment that we can.